Hello and welcome to Talk the Walk. I'm Raymond Yang. Hong Kong's business sector received a shot in the arm after authorities recently announced that it will slash the mandatory hotel quarantine from 7 days to just 3 days. Many take this as a signal that the government is finally willing to drop the zero COVID strategy, which has largely isolated the city from the rest of the world for the past 2.5 years. Joining us tonight is Emeritus Professor John Burns from the University of Hong Kong's Department of Politics and Public Administration. Professor, can I start off by asking you your thoughts on the relaxation of the quarantine rules?
Of course, we are all thrilled with this kind of a relaxation, but I do not think we should read too much into it. For example, I think it's quite likely that we will continue with the dynamic zero COVID. And the reason simply is that we are a local government of China and we have to follow this China policy. Also, I think it's because we are eager to reopen borders with the mainland. So I think we have to, yes, of course, it's welcome. And it is absolutely the case that we have been isolated as a result of this policy, but the policy on the mainland so far, we have no indication that it is being dropped, and I think we have to assume that it will continue. So I'm not optimistic about that, at least at the moment.
You said we are a local government of the whole of China. Like that, we totally agree. But at the same time, should we see this as a breakthrough of some sort? Because we've been discussing reopening Hong Kong's borders with the rest of the world for some time. And it was only until August right now that we're seeing the first step of what could be a total relaxation, as in quarantine-free travel. Is this some sort of breakthrough, you think?
I do think it's some sort of breakthrough. I mean, we've had very, very long quarantine that's been extremely disruptive. But I think it can only happen within this larger dynamic zero COVID policy for the rest of China. So we have to see where that takes us. And also we have to see the extent to which the central government is willing to relax that as well.
So for the viewers who've just tuned in, so I think we'd like to explain to you what this 3-day quarantine is about. So it used to be 7 days, but right now it's 3 days of hotel quarantine, followed by 4 days of self-isolation, where the people can leave their hotels, can go to work, but at the same time they can't go to restaurants or some sort of high-risk venues. Mr. Burns, can I ask you if you think the government has struck the right balance in reopening Hong Kong with the rest of the world, and then also having the pandemic control on the mind?
I'm unable to say whether it's the right balance. Of course, we all want everything, all of these controls to be dropped. But, as I say before, I think this is unlikely to happen. Many people in Hong Kong have not left for the past 2.5 years for the simple reason that they are unwilling to face the 2 weeks or 3 weeks of quarantine that we had before this. So yes, it's a significant change. I hope that it will continue in this direction, but whether it's the right balance or not, I'm unable to say.
And okay, let me then ask you this question. Chief Executive John Lee, when he announced this plan, one of the first questions that he was asked by the reporters was that whether the Hong Kong government has given up reopening the city's borders with the mainland because, like you said earlier in the show, that China still adopts this very strict zero COVID strategy. If we're opening Hong Kong's international borders, if you would say, so are we actually effectively giving up any hopes of reconnecting with the mainland?
Absolutely not. I think reconnecting with the mainland is a critical part of Hong Kong government strategy. So I assume that they are working hard on that. Remember, with the relaxation, we also have this new color-coded health pass system, which is being introduced now. basically meaning that if you come in from overseas and you have COVID, you get a red. If you are in quarantine, you get an amber kind of color, and if you are free to go, you get a blue event after you've done the hotel and the home quarantine. So they are trialing that, experimenting with that. It is a kind of mainland a similar thing, but it is not exactly the same as what's on the mainland. So I think the reason for the color coding system is to try to put mainland authorities at ease with reopening the border. Reopening the border is absolutely critical. So many of our resources for daily life come from the border. We've had problems with supplying Hong Kong at the height of the fifth wave. And so we don't want to reimpose these kinds of things again. We don't want a sixth wave like the fifth wave we are still in, probably.
So there's been this talk of the whole world returning to normal after COVID, and Hong Kong is clearly on the same page. But can I ask you, will Hong Kong ever be back to where it was before the COVID pandemic? I'm asking you this from the perspective of the airport, for example. It used to be one of the busiest aviation hubs not just in the region, but for the whole world. But then for those of you who've seen the pictures coming from the airport recently, you know it's been largely isolated. It's almost like a ghost town sometimes. Do you think once the rules are slowly relaxed or even dropped ultimately, so that Hong Kong will be back to where it was?
I hope so, but it depends on what you mean back to where it was. In 2019, we had massive social protests leading to riots. The airport was even closed for some times and occupied by protesters. So hopefully we're not going back to that kind of a thing. I don't think that's possible. You're talking about before that, when the airport was very busy. Back to normal as it was pre-pandemic, no. I don't think we're going to see that. And the reason is that coronavirus, COVID, will become endemic. We will have to continue to manage it, just as we do seasonal flu. So I think, it's not going to be exactly the same as it was before. Hopefully, however, we have a third runway now, and you could ask, what is the purpose of that if we continue as it is now? One other thing I think we should pay attention to, currently, when people come into Hong Kong, they go through a hellish procedure from the time they get off the plane until they get into a quarantine hotel that can last 4 or 5 hours. And this has got to be changed. And this is a process that is unnecessarily complex, I believe, does not take advantage of modern technology. And I think, so when we're talking about just the once you leave the airport stage, we also need to focus on the process in the airport, which at the moment is just Byzantinely complicated. Families with children, for example, are treated very, very badly in this process.
Coupled with that, can I also ask you about the brain drain in Hong Kong? Because the Hong Kong government, I think, recently also announced the figures of the population. So we've had the worst net outflow of population in a few years. So we've lost about 113,000 people over the past year. And many of these people, as you can imagine, are actually professionals like nurses, accountants who've moved overseas and taking their practices over there to where they've relocated. Is this a very serious problem that Hong Kong government needs to address?
Yes, I think it is a very serious problem. And I think it's partially related to the divisive politics that we have had stemming from the protests in 2014 and then 2019, the imposition of the national security law, the new electoral arrangements in Hong Kong and people's disaffection with these kinds of changes. So many people, I believe, left for those reasons. As you've alluded, other people left because they were fed up with the COVID restrictions. Those people may come back. And so we have to really assess what are the strengths of Hong Kong and will it continue to be an attractive place to live and work? I think this is the real issue, but the government does need to address this problem.
Can I also ask you about the so-called the vacancies in the secondary and primary schools? I know you're teaching in a university, but I'm not sure if you're encountering the same problems as Hong Kong's primary and secondary schools right now, because we're in the middle of August, but then reports are coming out saying there are still dozens, if not hundreds, of vacancies waiting to be filled at Hong Kong's schools because many of those teachers have already left, or some of the graduates from the education university example are having second thoughts about entering the industry. So what should the Hong Kong government do about this?
I think this is a significant problem. The government has said that it will consolidate schools, close schools, and they've pointed out to a demographic change. And it is true that for a while the school-age population will shrink naturally. So this part of it is not something new. But as you suggest, teachers have left, and there's a huge vacancy for teachers in primary and secondary schools. And so they've got to recruit more teachers from outside and make the teaching profession attractive. At the university, I think the problem is not so severe. As you may have seen, university admissions scores are lower now. It's easier to get into the 8 universities than it used to be before. But the classes, I think, will be filled with qualified people to be sure, but not people that had as high of scores as in the past. Teachers, there are always cases of some teachers leaving for various reasons, personal reasons, and professional reasons, and maybe for political reasons. I know of cases like this. But recruiting university teachers is a long, drawn-out process. And in my own department, for example, we have just welcomed 2 new teachers who will start this September. And so there isn't, I think, a problem so far of a particular problem like this at the university level.
Professor, let me stop you right there as we go on our break. Stay with us. We'll be back in a bit.